Hey man, how are you?
Oh, good evening. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks for coming on, taking the time.
It's very much my pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, as a historian, I love your background.
Oh, huh.
Yeah.
I'm not a historian, but to rip off Dan Carlin, I'm a historical enthusiast or a fan of history. Unlike
That's
him, who's almost essentially a hit. I mean,
I know, right? Like I love his stuff, but he's technically not a history guy. He's like a journalist, if I'm not mistaken, right?
yeah, okay. If we're going to get really, really technical
But he's a
about,
great historian, like one of the
yeah,
best I've ever listened to.
yeah.
Honestly,
I mean,
wow.
if somebody spreads that much history, then really, what are they? I mean, I don't know. It's semantics. It's playing clever with the semantics to get off the hook for anything he could get accused of.
What is one of your favorite series that he's done?
Oh, good Lord. I really like his Eastern Front one. That
Okay.
was mind opening to me. I had no idea. I love the Genghis Khan one,
That
the
me
World War
too.
One,
Those
the
those are my two favorites.
the episode about the Reformation and the madness at Munster was
I
amazing.
haven't listened to that one yet.
That's very good. It's I mean, it's kind of, you can see echoes of Jim Jones. You can see echoes of Waco, um, and really, at least in North America, so few people understand that there was this thing called the Reformation, which kind of created a bit of a problem for the entire world for 100 years,
Oh
maybe still,
yeah.
but I mean, it's calmed down a little bit.
Yeah, I was
But
just I was for my Civ 1 class, I get to that far. That's my stopping point, the Renaissance and the Reformation, Protestant
okay,
Reformation. So I was just, man, all day today, I was in there hammering out assignments for these college kids to be doing.
so you're teaching history?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, very
Yeah,
cool.
I have been teaching full time in addition to like my wife and I own a martial arts academy. Been
Okay.
teaching full time for about to start my third year of full time, and I taught part time a little bit before that.
Okay. So you're going to get used to the Zoom, or is it? You're in Arkansas?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And where you're in Canada,
I
correct?
am. Yeah, British
Okay.
Columbia. I
All
did
right.
spend a couple of months in Arkansas back in '99. So
Yeah. Okay. So ironically, and my coach is the gym that you went to, my head coach, who I got my black belt from, Danny Dring.
yeah, yeah,
Ironically, that's you've been to Arkansas and you
yeah,
trained with my head coach, which I've spent many, many, many
yeah.
hours on those same mats.
He seemed like a really, really good guy. That's, I mean, based off of 3 or 4 hours of interaction.
Yeah,
So
he's been on the podcast 2 or 3 times, and he actually married my wife and I. He became
oh,
became an ordained minister, and performed the ceremony for us. So,
like a legit minister, like a Universal Life Church minister.
like one of those,
Yeah.
we just
I too am a minister under the Universal Life Church. It was kind of a bullshitting session at the fire hall that got out of control. It's like, fuck y'all, I'm gonna become a minister. So it is often pointed out to me that my behavior isn't necessarily congruent with the position of minister. But yeah, who's perfect? Nobody's perfect.
yeah, yeah, precisely. Yeah, it just meant more to us. Like we didn't really have a minister in mind, anybody we wanted to do, and it just made more sense. It would have been more to have somebody really close to us perform the
Hmm.
ceremony. So I think that's why a lot of these people I've talked to over the years end up getting ordained.
Hmm.
Is just so they can do just be a part of somebody's moment like that.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. So you're also, I want to talk to you about this. This I've been referring to it as the complimentary COVID conversation,
Oh, okay.
right? That's like the first 10 minutes of anybody I talk to. But you said you're doing some homeschooling right now.
Hmm.
So you're teaching a little bit. What is education like for you guys right now? Like, how is it
Well,
teaching
it's
all?
not my first kick at the homeschooling can, really. Uh, my wife, with whom I had my children, and I were separated, but we still, and now divorced, but we still homeschooled our kids separately, kind of working together for the first, I'll say, 6 to 8 years of their education. So that was, you know, we're not newbies at the whole homeschooling thing. What we are newbies at is trying to, you know, parallel what the school system is putting out. And supposing, I don't know, supposing you and I, Brian, we went to Little Rock a year ago. We went to the school board of Little Rock and we convinced them, hey, we've got this great plan. Here's 12 irrefutable reasons why we should move our the entire education system online and just do it all through Zoom. Presumably, if they had been convinced, they would have said, that's fine. We would like 15 years to implement and test this. So that obviously was not the case. I don't know what it was like in Arkansas, but in British Columbia, where I live, the whole thing got cobbled together in about, I'll say, 2 weeks.
Same here.
Yeah.
For, you know, for college, that was, I mean, I was set up, man. I was like, oh, you guys want me to go to my studio at home and teach online? Yeah, this would be great. I'm set up for this. But, you know, one thing I wasn't set up for that I was just thinking about when you told me this, like, I'm not set up to teach all the subjects, right? I'm just set up to teach history. I could probably pull together an English class, you know, on a short notice. But, man, that's one thing. Like, I was actually homeschooled until the 8th grade. And I think to a certain point, I could handle doing multiple subjects. Like, what are the ages of your children that you're teaching?
We got 16, we got 14, 13, and we've got 8. So it's right through. But it's just really the only hard. Well, if I got 2 things to complain about, one is to do a good job takes a lot of time, and you know, I am still working full time as a firefighter, and I'm working as much as I can on GrappleArts, and I'm now homeschooling 3 kids, and I've got, you know, those 3 kids 24/7 and have had them 24/7 since March. It's a very, very, very full plate. So the having the mental bandwidth, I mean, I'm very lucky. I live in British Columbia where COVID has been, the curve has pretty much been crushed. I think we thought we would just get nuked at first because there's so much connection to Wuhan here. Like, there's so many Asians, so many mainland Chinese who come here for school and for living. It seemed, and we live right next door to Washington State, which was, of course, the first center of the outbreak in the United States. So it seemed reasonable that we were just going to get destroyed. As it turns out, for a couple of reasons, probably including the prevalence of mask wearing, which just made it a more normative thing, right? It's rare to see a white guy in a mask, but because there's so many Asians around wearing masks anyway, it's not actually that big a deal. And I think it's, in retrospect, when the analysis gets done, that'll really contribute to the fact that, I mean, BC, I don't think we've had a death. I think we had 1 death a couple days ago, and it's like the first death in, I want to say, a week or 10 days. I should be more up on the stats for around us here. Yeah, so really being very lucky to be in a place like that, the biggest hardship for me personally has been just the absolute destruction of any discretionary time. I mean, it's a hardship, but compared to what some people are going through, it's a very, very small hardship.
Yeah. So you mentioned mask wearing, and I saw a post you made, you know, with commenting, because I was listening to Joe Rogan when I saw your post. But so Fayetteville, it's probably, I'm an hour from Little Rock, and Fayetteville's about an hour 45 from me. And they just passed a city ordinance today mandating that masks be worn in all public spaces in the city of Fayetteville.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, it's really unfortunate that the CDC and the World Health Organization were giving conflicting messages on this early on. It's really done a tremendous amount of harm to the public conversation around this, and I understand why they did it. I work for the fire department. I've been a firefighter for 21 years. I'm a captain. I'm very, very heavily involved with our hazmat program. When COVID broke here, we were panicking because there were just not enough N95 masks to go to calls with. And we were like, are we going to be going to calls, wearing our medical calls, wearing our full SCBA, right, the full air cylinder on the back. And that seemed like a reasonable thing. And there were departments locally that were doing that. They would basically treat it like a full hazmat call because they didn't have the right protective equipment, PPE. And getting the right PPE is still a major problem. I mean, Canada has majorly pissed off China recently in some political things. And so maybe that's why we're not getting PPE, or maybe there's just not any PPE to be had. I don't know. So I can see why the messaging early was, yeah, don't go with masks. It might have been much more intellectually honest and done less harm to the public conversation in the long run had they said, look, we think masks work, but we really need them for the first responders. So how about the normal public just use surgical masks and we'll save the N95s for doctors? Would that have stopped people hoarding them? I don't think so.
I couldn't even get any for a long time. Like the first couple of weeks of the outbreak, I was wearing like a bandana tied, you know.
Yeah. So you didn't drop dead of carbon dioxide poisoning and your immune system didn't collapse?
Not yet.
Okay.
It's we're a few months in. I'm still, you know, walking on eggshells, but yeah, it's but no, you know, and like for example, there's a guy that he's a judo and aikido guy, but he's also an orthopedic surgeon, and he's got a lot of really awesome. He knows 3 styles of Wing Chun. He comes in and trains with me once a week, and he was like, "Hey, I'm just gonna come in. I'm gonna wear a mask. You're gonna wear a mask. We're still gonna work out." I'm like, "You're 72 and a doctor, okay." And he would tell me, and it's funny, as soon as we get done like working with each other, he would like start practicing social distancing. He would like be 6 feet away from me, and I would like kind of step kind of close to him, and he would step 6 feet back, even though we still have our mask on. But he was like, "You see what I'm doing here?" But
they're limiting the risk. I mean, I explain this to my kids when they're like, "Well, what you know, I went and visited this friend. Why can't I visit this friend? I went into this store for 5 seconds. Why can't I go to all these other stores?" It's a risk per unit time, right? It's like, I don't know, you're driving a car that's going 50 kilometers an hour. Every extra minute that you're on the road, you've gone further. Or you've got to, you know, your risk crashing your car is, sorry, I should go in miles. Your risk of having a major car accident are 1 for every, I don't know, 100,000 miles you drive. Each additional mile you drive is a greater chance. So we're all playing the odds here, right? Masks aren't 100% perfect, not at all, but they're a whole lot better than nothing. And there's a compounding effect. If you're wearing a mask that's 50% efficient, and I'm wearing a mask that's 50% efficient, assuming it's the same for the in and the out, which isn't quite true, then the net effect is 75%. And now if I've got to go to the dentist and we're taking precautions that limit me 50% from exposure, now it's 50%. I mean, it's actually a bad example because I'm wearing a mask during the dentist visit, but you get my point, right? It's.
I went to the dentist here and I had to wear a mask, like all the way. There was a whole bunch of, they had canceled my appointment. I had one in March, right? So they canceled, but man, they had a lot, like probably, no exaggeration, probably like 20 things I had to do to get a cleaning that day. But I wear a mask all the way until like they were putting the stuff in my mouth.
Fair enough. So they're limiting their time in the danger zone, right? They're limiting it. You know, your total dose is time times concentration, right? So you can limit your time, or you can limit the amount, the rate at which you're being exposed to. Both are good. But it's insane that wearing a mask has become a political issue. Like, I understand why some other things became a political issue. Like, okay, I can understand why people think that hydroxychloroquine became a political issue. Well, Trump endorsed it, therefore people who don't like it have to hate Trump. I don't think that's correct, but I see why people think that. And maybe it is correct for some people. I don't think it was true for me. But it's insane that masks have become a political issue now. I mean, you take a look at football games during the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, everyone's wearing a freaking mask in the States.
And there were also, I had a historian come on and talk about this that brought this up, Mitch Lerner, if you want to check it out, or he's got some great articles he's been writing for the Washington Post, but he said that there were anti-mask leagues
in the
United States. Yes. About the time, and he is so great about like, hey, here's what's going on right now, and here's what happened in 1918. See how
Okay.
they're the same, you know? And he just really made that point. But he's like, yes, we got to a point where, you know, they had flattened numbers. So like my community at one point, we had only 7 active cases. Now we have like 93 or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've had more recovered cases than that, but it's
Sure.
like we had it almost all the way gone.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not going to say we wouldn't have had some come back in, but we only had 7 active cases in the community that shoots up hundreds of cases.
I'm not a fan of communist China at all. At all.
Same.
But if you had to choose one or two political systems to effectively deal with a pandemic, like a legit pandemic, whether it's Ebola, SARS, MERS, SARS-CoV-2, COVID, whatever the hell, and one is an authoritarian regime that can absolutely shut down any part of the country, weld people into their apartment buildings and say, you will install this app on your phone and we will contact trace you, and you have no choice. And that's political system 1. And political system 2 is this, you know, radical democracy thing, and where, you know, states can go against other states, can go against governors, can go against mayors of the city, and the president's saying this and the doctor's saying that. And like, which of those two systems would you bet on to do well in a pandemic? I'm going to go with, I don't want it to be true, but as my 16-year-old kid said, facts don't care about your feelings. You know, the first system is actually more resilient, at least in the short and medium term, than
I would agree.
the second system.
Yes. Well, you know, here's a question that I just wanted to hit you, like, while we're on the topic.
I'm sorry, we're way off the topic of jiu-jitsu here.
Well, here's where we can.
I've been making enemies at such a frantic pace online that why not?
So we'll go full circle. Like, I know. So why I wanted to bring this up also is I figured you would have an opinion about this, being who you are. What does the world look like for us post COVID-19 or moving forward from today? And like, what's jiu-jitsu look like? What's jiu-jitsu like post COVID-19?
Well, post COVID-19,
or over the next year,
yeah,
you know, like moving forward from right now.
Yeah. Man, I don't know. Like I tell you, jiu-jitsu looks pretty good in New Zealand right now. Right? They crushed that curve. It turns out that you can actually crush the curve and get rid of it completely, so long as you're on top of it and have like a unified response and a fairly intense initial response. And then, you know, sort of like, would you like me to amputate your arm quickly or slowly, right? Like, you want me to take an axe and chop it off and it's really going to hurt, but it's going to be over quickly? Or would you like me to take a bread knife and slowly saw your arm off? I'm going with the axe every time. So in places where the curve has been crushed or at least heavily suppressed, yeah, they end up with a New Zealand situation. I'm assuming that all gyms are open in New Zealand. I don't know that for a fact. I should probably find out. But I'm seeing a lot locally where there isn't a lot of community transmission. I guess we got to define terms, right? Community transmission is when people are still getting it out there, right? 5 people got sick at a supermarket and they got it out there in the community, as opposed to getting it in a hospital or, you know, in like, man, I was intubating a sick patient and I got sprayed in the face. So if community transmission is very low, then I think it's reasonable to start training with a very small group of people. And I think really the safest number of people is 1, right? And I don't mean solo drills. I mean, you and I form a monogamous jiu-jitsu training relationship. Dude, you're going to be careful out in general. I'm going to be careful out in general. But you and I will only train together.
Yes.
And if I start feeling sick, I'll let you know. If you start feeling sick, you let me know. If anyone in your circle has been feeling sick, you let me know. If anyone in my circle is feeling sick, I'll let you know. And of course, it's not as good as the, you know, like Shark Tanking with 12 people, or just, hey, I'm going to roll with this guy because he's got a great spider guard. I'm going to roll with that guy because he's really good at smash pass, and roll with this chick because she's really good at heel hooks. That's way more fun. But I think this idea of a monogamous training partner relationship is probably what we're going to see a lot of. And I've heard of people creating training pods, sort of trying to limit, you know, if somebody comes in sick and pre-symptomatic, and meaning they're going to get sick in a week, but they're infectious right now, then they're only going to infect 3 people max, as opposed to 20 people max. I
Mhm.
think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think, you know, but really, I'm with what Bill Gates said in the first 10 minutes of this pandemic. I don't think things will get fully back to normal until there's a vaccine, or until there's a really easy way to test people. And this, I'm adding this to Bill Gates. I think Bill Gates missed 2 things: until there's a really easy way to treat people, or until there's a really easy way to test people, right? I mean, if it was a $5, you know, Senegal was developing a $1 COVID test. I don't know how effective it was. I don't think they're there yet. But if there was a $1 test where you know, here's your little swab, you lick it, you put in the vial, and if it turns, you get 2 lines like a pregnancy test, you're sick. There's 1 line, you're good to go. I would pre-buy a case of those things and like,
For sure.
yeah, like, oh, guess what, guys? Your monthly dues are going to go up by $5 or $10 or whatever. But I'm also going to test every one of you before class, and that way you can be sure that everyone that you're training with is safe.
Well, Joe Rogan's testing all of his podcast guests. I heard him talking about, and you know, I saw him in the UFC. They like a good friend of mine was just Bryce Mitchell from Arkansas. Like one of his coaches, a really good friend of mine. He filmed him getting his swab. Man, they stuck it way up his nose.
Yeah, I think that's a big disincentive. Like I know a bunch of people have been tested, but they were all sick. I don't know anybody who's gone, you know, I should probably just go get a test for fun. I haven't had a test this week. Let me take an hour out of my day and go get this nasal swab stuck all the way to my back of my brainstem. If there was an easier test, I think that'd be a game changer. If there was a really high standard of care. I mean, today there was that Oxford study, I believe, showing that dexamethasone, which is like a cheap altitude drug. I gotta laugh. There was a terrible movie. I think it was called Altitude, something Altitude. It was a terrible mountaineering movie where for some reason they're climbing Mount Everest with vials of nitroglycerin for some reason.
Vertical Limit.
Horrific movie.
Yeah,
but
Chris O'Donnell.
Get the Dex, right? They're injecting each other with Dex. And apparently Dex can do anything. You can like leap from, you know, 400 feet across chasms and then stick the landing with a couple of ice. You remember that scene?
Yes. That was, as soon as you said that, that's the scene I had in my mind. That was my mental picture.
Yeah. I saw that. I remember that. That was in summer of '93 that came out, because I was on another canoe trip. I go on these big long canoe trips occasionally, and I pulled into the town of Fort McMurray. It was kind of my last stop before just getting right into the sticks. And so I went to a restaurant and I went and watched a movie that night, and I saw Vertical Limit. I was like, what was it? The Stallone movie. Might have been the Stallone movie.
Cliffhanger.
It came out right around the same time. It was one of those terrible movies. I was like, man, there's no point in coming out of civilization. I don't care. You know, these movies are terrible. It's not good enough to leave my boat. Let me get back to my boat.
Well, so tell me, that was one thing. I kind of read something about you recently. Tell me about these canoe trips. You went on one recently. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. Well, I grew up in Ontario, which is kind of like, I don't know, the Minnesota of the United States, right? It's the Minnesota of Canada. So canoeing's big. It's Canadian Shield, right? There's tons of lakes, tons of rivers. I mean, I've driven through Duluth, and the canoe and the fur trade are pretty embedded into that part of Minnesota anyway. So I grew up paddling, but then I started doing some solo trips. I was actually on a trip with one of my brothers, and he had to bail. He had some pretty good addiction issues. So like one day into the trip, he's like, that's it, I'm bailing. Basically, he didn't bring enough drugs. And he bailed, and I was like, man, I'm not going to let this ruin. I've been looking forward to this for 4 months. So I went and I continued for another 2 days and 1 night. And it was really an amazing experience to be out there. So you asked me about the big long trip. I'm talking about the short little trip.
Yeah, well, I mean, just in general, we can talk about the recent one, but like, what's it like being just like? So I've gone several canoe trips. I've even gone in the wilderness on the Buffalo River here in Arkansas, which is like a 30-mile stretch, and we didn't even see anybody the whole time for 3 days. But what's that like, just being by yourself?
Well, it was a concern initially because I'd done some shorter trips, right? I'd done like 3-day trips and, you know, some 2-day hikes and stuff. So I was fine there, right? You start small. And then I started wondering about a bigger trip, and that was a trip from Northern Ontario up to Hudson Bay and then back. It's basically upriver back to Hudson, and I had concerns. I mean, there's bears and there's polar bears and there's rapids and stuff like that. But really, the biggest fear I had, if I'm honest about it, was like, big tough guy makes it out into the wilderness and is all lonely because there's nobody there to talk to. Right? Like that really was my concern, my biggest concern. And I found it wasn't the case at all. For me, that trip was a rite of passage because I did it at the end of my undergrad. And I was like, I wanted to mark the transition from one phase of my life to the other, right? In the same way, I don't know, I suppose the native peoples had vision quests, and sailors crossing the equator would go for the first time, would go through a hazing of sorts. And many cultures used to have these sorts of rites of passage, but now, hey, you've graduated, here's your diploma, now piss off. So I wanted to have something, I wanted to do something that was difficult and had a chance of failure, quite honestly. I mean, that if something is guaranteed to be a success, then it's not difficult. And so that was a 4-week trip. And
Wow.
yeah, I wasn't completely alone. There were other groups of people on the river. I went through one town, Moosonee, ran into the occasional native fisherman, that kind of thing. But I never felt lonely. There were times I wanted to say, hey, look at that. Isn't that amazing, to somebody, right? I wanted to share what I was going through. But in terms of like lying there in a fetal position, rocking back and forth, not once. So that was a good discovery. And so then, I mean, it's hard to set up your life to be able to do these sorts of things on the regular, especially once you move on to, having kids and that sort of thing. It took a lot of logistics to set up, just taking off for 50 days last summer. And really it's more like 50. Yeah, it was about 50 days, including like traveling and coming back and all that. And it was wonderful to be out there again. It's a little bit disconcerting to be out there in a body that's 20 years or 25 years older than it was the last time I did it. I really pushed myself very hard. I think I'd been 12 days before I took my first half day rest. And like my hormonal systems just crashed. And it took me months to recover because I was pushing myself really hard, and just like not sleeping enough, not eating enough, being wet and cold.
What kind of, I read you ran into some crazy stuff out there too. Like what kind of hardships were you running into that were crashing you, other than you feeling older than you once were?
Well, one pretty dramatic part was it's the boreal forest, right? The boreal forest in northern Canada burns. It burns on average, I want to say, every 50 to 70 years, right? It's almost designed to burn, or at least the plants are adapted to recover from fire, because it can get very dry. It's all coniferous forest. There's, like fires go through there regular. So I was heading upriver on the Cochrane River, and I could see fires burning in the distance, far to the left and far to the right. It's like one of those, I don't know, mushroom cloud plumes. It looks like somebody's dropped a nuke somewhere in the middle of the forest. Usually they pick up in mid-morning as the weather begins to warm. By mid-afternoon, they're gigantic. So I was working my way up the Cochrane, and I noticed that the smoke was getting a lot thicker. My visibility was going down. The sun set with just a bright red. I mean, it looked like horrific Los Angeles smog. And so basically the river's heading northwest. And the further I go, the worse it gets. So I do dial a friend on my Garmin, right? The Garmins have got basic satellite text. And I get the locations of the various fires that are around me. And as it turns out, there's one that's basically directly ahead of me. And the wind is blowing directly towards me, meaning that fire's coming my way. And so it turned into a race to get to the point where I would then basically turn a hard right and get out of the line of fire. And by the end of it, it was getting pretty dodgy. I mean, I had a plan. If I got caught in the wildfire, I'd retreat to the middle of the river and go down river till I got to a lake. And then if I had to, flip the boat in the shallows and breathe the water under the under the boat till the big wave of fire passed. Let's just call that the plan D, right? Maybe the plan E. So yeah, that was a bit of a tense time. I did manage to get to the point where the river turned before the fire got there. I've been meaning to, and I haven't, to take a look at the fire maps for last summer and see, roughly how much I beat that fire to that one point by. And then just bugs and bears and, just long
we
hours.
run into black bears around here, but you really don't. I don't hear stories of people getting attacked by them. There's bear seasons, but bears are much larger in your part of the country. I feel like I mean, we're talking grizzly bears, polar bears. What do you see?
All three. I saw tundra grizzly. They're pretty aggressive. They're larger. I definitely ran into some black bear. I had a very close encounter with a bear that I don't know what it was, but I was going towards a bunch of cabins, and I'd left my 12 gauge in the boat.
Bigfoot, probably.
For the record, just should I ruin your listenership by saying I've never seen any sign of Bigfoot ever? And for that matter, Les Stroud, who I've had on my podcast, also doesn't really believe in Bigfoot either, despite his show of looking for Bigfoot. Black bear behavior varies a lot, right? It depends if they're eating small rodents and stuff, or eating fish or eating berries. That's one thing. Further north, the further north they go, the more predatory they become, right? So they go from hunting small things to maybe hunting caribou, maybe hunting deer, maybe hunting baby moose calves. Right? So they're used to eating larger mammals, and guess what? You and I are larger mammals, and it's the idea of being caught in a tent with one of those things coming through the tent. That's pretty bad situation. I mean, then the natives up there, as you start getting closer to Hudson Bay, they're totally willing to go in tents to go caribou hunting, right? If they're going to go and fly in or skidoo in for 50 miles to go hunt caribou, fine, no problem. They'll stay in canvas tents, but staying along the Hudson Bay coast where all the polar bears live, very, very, very few of them will do that in a tent. Like maybe a cabin, but in a tent, you're just stupid. And so along the coast, it starts getting really quite worrisome. So you really got to try and, again, just like with COVID, you're trying to minimize the amount of time that you're in the danger zone, right? Like minimize your risky behaviors. So I didn't fish on that trip. I didn't want to smell like fish, right? Not smelling like food is your number one defense. Also, I tried to pass through the danger areas as fast as possible, right? So if you have to spend time on the coast, let's be here for an afternoon. Let's not be here for, a leisurely week of hanging out and watching belugas.
Yeah, wow. What we had a black bear in our camp one night. We were camped on a gravel.
This is on the Arkansas River?
This is on the Buffalo. Right? Okay. So Buffalo National River is a beautiful river. It runs, it takes, something like 3 weeks to float the entire thing, right? But there's a 40-mile section.
My only references for Arkansas are Camden and Little Rock itself. Those are the two places I've been.
So it runs it runs almost through a significant portion of the state. Okay. I can't give you any markers based to there, but the wilderness portion's like the last 40 miles, and it runs into the White River. We had a black bear in our camp one night, and we were in tents, but it was just pilfering around outside. We weren't too worried about it, but we were camped on a gravel bar, and it waded over through the shallow. And
did you drive it off with noise, or what did you do?
Yeah, we drove it off with noise.
Mm-hmm.
That happened. I mean, that was kind of scary, but
Get the blood moving.
Can't imagine it being a larger bear, because the black bears around here are not. I mean, the biggest one I've ever seen still wasn't large.
Well, there's also so many hunters in Arkansas that basically any bear has learned to stay away from humans, or that humans can be dangerous, right? I mean, there are apparently grizzlies in northern Italy that are just so shy because they've been there for, they've been hunted for thousands of years, that the ones that weren't shy have been wiped out, right? It's basically Darwinian selection. So you end up with very, very shy grizzlies living in the mountains in northern Italy.
Yeah, the accounts on the Lewis and Clark expedition
I
of
always
them.
wonder how much those accounts are like written. I mean, I've read tons of the early explorer accounts, and I always wonder how much poetic license is put in there to, sell books at home.
Yeah, have you seen the Ken Burns documentary on Lewis and Clark?
No, I haven't.
It's pretty good.
Okay.
He's if you've never seen any of his documentary films for history,
Yeah, I've seen the
uh,
Civil War stuff.
yes, Civil
uh,
War is great.
Part of the
Vietnam War,
Vietnam, yeah,
yeah,
but I
nice.
haven't seen the Lewis and Clark one.
It's good. Thomas Jefferson, that's one that I like to show that's good as well. But man, I really enjoy his work. So, well, okay. So let me ask you this. So, you had kind of overcome an illness at
Hmm.
some point recently. Was how long ago was this, and what was that like? How was your recovery?
Uh, so the illness that you're referring to, I think, is polycystic kidney disease, right? It's a genetic thing. I inherited it from my mom. She lived to 72 and then died of something else. Uh, Me, on the other hand, for whatever reason, maybe it was doing all that sparring and getting hit in the body. Okay, so basically in polycystic kidney disease, your kidney, roughly the size of your fist, decides it doesn't want to be a fist anymore and decides it wants to be like a Nerf football or bigger. And so it begins swelling. And as it swells, it doesn't become better at filtering, it becomes worse at filtering. So I noticed it, I found out about it first after an MMA sparring session. No, sorry, not after an MMA, after just a jiu-jitsu sparring session. I had peed blood. I'd pissed blood after hard sparring. Yeah, a few
That's happened to
times.
me. It's
Yeah,
happened to me.
yeah, it's not good, but yeah, it makes sense, right? I got smoked in the kidneys, or I got smoked in the side of the belly. Kind of makes sense. Uh, it turns out I was a little bit more susceptible to that than normal because of the larger kidneys and what the cysts, which are like little balloons, really would burst and then they'd bleed. But one day after jiu-jitsu class, I got home and I hadn't taken any throws. I hadn't been punched. I just trained hard and I'm peeing blood. I'm like, something's not right. I shouldn't, there's no mechanism here by which I should be peeing blood. I haven't eaten any beets, right? There's no reason for this to be red.
For real.
Uh, so I went and investigated and it turns out that I've got polycystic kidney disease just like my mom. And so gradually over a space of about 5 years, my kidney function, I forget what it was when I started. I want to say like 50, 60%. You can lead a perfectly normal life on 50 to 60% of a kidney. It went down and down and down. By the time I got to 25% function, I was getting pretty tired. Like I'm really not recovering. And I made it down to like 13, 14% function. I was still working at the fire department. That was silly. I shouldn't have. But like by like 11 o'clock in the morning, I would just be destroyed. It'd be like I'd pulled an all-nighter, just fatigued. And the guys were pretty good. I held on for another month or so. I'd be like trying to nap at the fire hall and just praying that a call didn't come in and relying on adrenaline. If we did get a call, then I was like, okay, screw this. And very, very fortunately, my brother had decided to give me a kidney. So, I'm O negative. So,
My wife's so negative.
okay. So I could give a kidney to anyone. I just can't get a kidney from anyone. So yeah, I was pretty down, but I was also had done everything I could to be in as good a shape as I could. Right, I was still weightlifting, still doing cardio. Now cardio didn't look like the hard cardio it used to, but something's better than nothing. And so my recovery went pretty quickly. There were a couple of setbacks, a couple of infections and stuff, but within I want to say 7 months, I was able. No, I was training. I remember my first roll back. I think it was like, I want to say 3 months after the surgery, maybe two. And it was with a 7 month pregnant Chinese woman who was like 110 pounds soaking wet. And like, okay, we're going to roll. And I've got a very strong vested interest in you not hitting my belly. And you've got a very strong interest in me not hitting your belly. So we trained. That was my first training session back and it felt fantastic. Within 7 months, 6 months, 7 months, I was training reasonably normally again. I think Fortunately, my kickboxing days are behind me. I don't want to do something stupid there. I think impact training is really the main thing I've had to give up. I pulled off a 30-mile hike in the mountains with, 5,000 meters elevation change. So 15,000
Wow.
feet up and down in one day, 7 months after training. That was 7 months after the surgery. That was kind of a goal. And then a couple more surgeries. I had to have the old kidneys removed. That was actually much more painful than the first one. I believe the doctors, I tied the record for the fastest release after transplant. And I set a new record for fastest release after like double kidney removal, right? I had the two old ones removed. I've got a friend who lost a kidney to cancer. I tell him that he's a pussy because anyone can lose one kidney. It takes a real man to lose two kidneys. And
Yeah, both of them. Wow. So you were experiencing both your kidneys decreasing in function at the same time? Is that what
yeah,
was going on?
exactly.
Wow.
So I had three kidneys in me for a while. The one transplant and the two old ones. And
Wow.
so no, I think I'm so grateful to live now as opposed to 100 years ago, because 100 years ago I'm dead. I'm so grateful to be living here in North America. And if I was a villager in Uzbekistan or in sub-Saharan Africa or like Rarotonga, presumably, I'd be dead, right? The infrastructure wouldn't be there for transplantation. I'm also so glad that I live in Canada, where we have more or less socialized medicine. So I came out of that, over the course of a year of treatment, a couple of surgeries, my expenses were maybe, I want to say like $300, because it's really expensive
Wow.
to park at the hospital. And that was all through parking fees. Also, again, I'm really grateful I worked for the fire department, because they basically said, look, go away and come back when you're healthy, right? As opposed to, I knew truck drivers who were like, I'm okay, I'm gonna start driving truck again, or I'm gonna go broke, right? There were a lot of factors that really helped me focus on getting ready for the transplant and recovering from it. And if I'd go in, I'd do light duties, I'd develop training protocols for them in the morning. In the afternoon, I'd go do rehab, right? Rehab usually meant hiking in the mountains or, going to the gym. And that's a real luxury, right? So thank you, fire department. Thank you, socialized medicine. Thank you for being born now. Thank you for being born in North America. There's just so many ways the story doesn't end well.
Well, you have a lot of gratitude around that, I can tell. I mean, what
Thank you, my brother, who gave me his kidney. I should also thank him.
what was your mindset like? Did you have any tips? Because I've had a hernia repair, and I mean, those are some pretty dark times for me mentally. But I mean, that's a unique thing I've seen over the years. People get a surgery, maybe they don't come back to jiu-jitsu. They just you're just uncertain. Like, oh, am I ever going to be able to train again?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. The answer for most things is probably yes. I mean, maybe I'm sure there are some medical conditions where this can happen. You got really bad osteoporosis, got really bad hemophilia, you're very immune compromised. I talk to your doctor, but maybe jiu-jitsu isn't for you. But I think, let me start at the end. The punchline here is that because I've had a number of surgeries, right? I've had orthopedic surgeries to have injuries repaired. I've had a hernia repair. I've had broken arm repair. I've had a broken foot repaired. Thank you, jiu-jitsu. Thank you, jiu-jitsu. Thank you, jiu-jitsu. I have an intrinsic faith that just because there's a layoff doesn't mean it's forever, right? Anyone who gets the black belt has had to take a layoff for some reason, somehow. They were purple belt and their wife said, we're moving to a different state, or their job said, no, you really, really have to work on the Jones contract, or it's finals in your final year of university and you're way behind. Layoffs happen, right? And you get back to jiu-jitsu after. So I have an intrinsic faith that I'll get back to jiu-jitsu. So I'm actually handling this COVID layoff fairly well. I have an intrinsic faith we'll get back. It may take a lot longer than I want it to be, but eventually, you know, there'll be a test, there'll be a vaccine, there'll be some kind of effective treatment. We'll have a protocol. There'll be something. Like, we will get back. How long? I don't know, but we will get back, all of us. Going into the actual surgery, I'm pretty stoic, I think. Like, really, you do everything you can to mitigate the risk. What is doing everything you can to mitigate the risk? You go in as good a shape as you can, right? You try and take as good care of your health as you can. You shouldn't go, oh man, I don't know, I've torn my ACL. I've torn my ACL and I've got to wait, I don't know, 2 months to surgery, say. All right. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, by all means.
Fuck. I'm just going to eat 4 tubs of Haagen-Dazs a day. It doesn't matter. I'm here to tell you it does matter, right? Like, if instead of, if they're going to harvest it from your other leg, well, it's time to start doing weight training. It's time to start doing weight training on both legs. Get those legs as massively strong as you possibly safely can, and your recovery time will be so much less, right? That is within your control. What's not within your control? Whether the doctor actually does a good job, right? Like, so, you know, control, it's like the Alcoholics Anonymous prayer, right? What is it? Grant me the strength to change things I can, the serenity to accept the things I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, there's a whole lot of things you can change, right? You can start out as healthy as you can. You can start out as in shape as you can. You can prehab if they have to operate on a body part. And then after, you can be conscientious about your rehab. And the whole time you can be conscientious about your diet. Other things you can do is learn about what you're going through, right? Like, you can learn what is a Lisfranc injury, what is a knee meniscus surgery, how, you know, like, how to rehab from ACL surgery, right? The number one reason people don't recover from injuries is because they're not doing the actual rehab, or they do the rehab for a bit, they feel better, and then they stop. And I've made that mistake more than enough times to vouch for it. That really is what happens. Right? It's so easy to stop. Oh, I feel better, therefore I can stop. No, you feel better, so keep on doing it.
You know, I recall just us here talking about this. So when I found out I had a hernia, one of the first things I did was Google, oh my God, I have a hernia and I train jiu-jitsu. What am I going to do? And you had like a blog.
Yeah.
Like, you were like, you came up. But that's one thing, like, I told a couple of my students you were going to come on, and they're like, man, that guy, he has a video for everything. Like, I just recently watched your Imanari roll video, which I think is really a great breakdown of a difficult move for a lot of people. But you have a unique way of teaching. Like, when did you start getting involved? I mean, like, you really are like the first guy that comes up for when beginners search, when I search, being a 3-year black belt. Like, when did you get the GrappleArts rolling? Like, and what was your like impotence to do all of this?
I started thinking about it in 2002, and then started doing it in 2003. So in 2002, I was a purple belt, but there really wasn't much online education there. And
was there a
YouTube
in 2002?
No, that came later. I remember the very first YouTube video I put out, really sitting there and debating for days, because I released a video from one of my instructions. I think it was the high percentage leg locks DVD back in the day. And I sat there going back and forth. Well, what if I release a technique from that DVD? Then people get it for free, then they will buy the DVD. But on the other hand, that's kind of like a movie trailer. But on the other, like, going back and forth now, like, man, the more stuff you show, the better. And it, in terms of pedagogy, in terms of how to teach properly, that's a tough one. I mean, people learn in such different ways, right? Some people want to have it explained to them. Some people want to have it shown to them. Some people want analogies. I've just really paid attention to some of the really great teachers that I've come across. I mean, I trained with Oleg Tartarov, the old UFC champion, maybe 5 times. I don't recall exactly, maybe 5 seminars, and I've talked to him a few times since. I had him on, again, I had him on my podcast recently. And I mean, his analogy for like, okay, how do you do joint lock? I'm going to stop with the Russian accent now. But he's like, you take a stick, you got to hold both ends of the stick, and you got to put your knee in the middle, and you got to break it. So if you're doing an arm bar, you got to hold the wrist, you got to hold the shoulder, and then you have to put pressure into the middle of the stick to break it. I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's not a bad analogy for how to do most straight joint locks. So I'm like, okay, that's a great analogy. I'm going to steal it. I'll give credit, but I'm definitely going to steal that one. So just trying to pay attention to because there's the techniques, but then there's also the teaching methods. And those are two different things. I mean, we've all met great competitors who make terrible teachers. I think it's less in jiu-jitsu, actually. I mean, probably it's a bigger problem in other sports, but still, we've all met really good jiu-jitsu people who would, clean the mat with everybody at their seminar, one after another, who can't teach their way out of a paper bag, or alternately, teach the wrong thing for the crowd. Here's what I'm determined to teach. I'm determined to teach the upside down, inside out, reverse triangle choke from spider guard to a crowd that might not know what an upa escape from the mount is, or what the basic armbar from the guard is. So I think pedagogy, or the ability to teach, has come a long way in jiu-jitsu. I mean, it used to be, the VHS tapes used to be just a random collection of 10 different techniques that had nothing to do with each other. And now people are much better about putting out, systems or a coherent strategy. First I try this. Not all the time, not every producer, but it's much better.
So I would say you're well known, maybe most known for jiu-jitsu, but you mentioned kickboxing, you mentioned MMA. I know you've got at least maybe if it's just them selling your DVDs, but I feel like you've had some connection with Eric Paulson and trained with those guys over the years. What are some other things you're into besides jiu-jitsu, and like what sort of crossover in methods do you use, if that makes sense?
I'll answer the easy one first. I mean, right now I really have to focus mostly on jiu-jitsu. It's just there's so little time. So there's a ton of stuff I would love to do that I don't have time to do. In the past, I've trained quite a bit in judo, a middling amount of wrestling, little bits of sambo. So that's sort of the takedown end of things. I've gone into heavy phases of the Filipino martial arts, the Kali, the Arnes, mostly under Daniel Santo, a little bit in the Kitty Tercia system, indirectly under Leo Gahe. A fair number of Kung Fu systems. I mean, for what it's worth, if somebody really wants to know, it was mostly Hungar, Northern Shaolin, Southern Crane. Those would be the main ones, a little bit of Tai Chi. Wing Chun. Capoeira. I was heavily into capoeira when I was younger. That's cool. It's fantastic gymnastics, really. It's I mean, how combative is it? Sure. You can use the occasional capoeira technique. Some really cool highlights of capoeira guys knocking the guy out with a big hands on the ground wheel kick. But mostly I would think of that as a training method, right? You can do gymnastica natural, you can do gymnastics, or you can do capoeira. You're going to get similar things out of all of them, like a spatial awareness, a body control, dynamic flexibility or mobility. In terms of commonalities, man,
well, I mean, so you put out content for, like, I've seen you put out a variety of content, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to have a blog about a hernia repair. You're going to have these leg lock videos, but like, like maybe when I say methods, like, are there things like when you're like, okay, this way I explain this to jiu-jitsu people, that's also going to work over here for boxing. Like I saw you explain like a boxing for grapplers sort of concept, right? But like some crossovers like that, I feel like that was a really good video. I was like, okay, this is needed for somebody that's never going to do boxing. You know what I'm saying? For a jiu-jitsu guy that's not necessarily interested in
There are some common concepts. I mean, the concept of distance is really critical in both arts, right? I'm not going to throw the same punch when I'm 1 foot away from you as I am when I'm 3 feet away from you. I'm not going to do the same attack when I've got you in a spider guard with feet on the biceps pushing you away versus a closed guard, or rather, if it's the same attack, I'm going to get to it a different way, right? So basically, it's a different technique. So distance is super important in both. I'd say the footwork and mobility for the standing arts is a little bit different from the footwork and mobility in the ground game, but still, like, you need the ability to move. There's certain ways to move your feet, and there's certain ways to move on the ground over an opponent, right? Like whether it's knee mount going from side to side, that's a drill that most people know. That's kind of like, the jab cross, and, a circle to your left and then right cross, right? That you need to be able to move on the ground. You're not just, here I am a turtle, with my legs in the air. It's not the best analogy. Some commonalities. I've worked a lot with Rob Bernanke, and his big thing is the trifecta of jiu-jitsu is base, posture, and structure. So base is your ability to basically push on the ground or on your opponent to generate force, right? If you're jumping in the air like a ballerina and trying to punch the guy, it might work, but you're unlikely to really land a punch because you're not in base. If I try and do a butterfly sweep where my other foot isn't on the ground, where I'm not pushing off the ground to lift you with my instep, it's again not going to work. I don't have the base. I don't have anything to push off of. Posture is your spine, your neck, and your spine in alignment. This applies to both things, right? If I'm trying to box with you and I'm all twisted up and my head's like this, your shoulder touching you're touching the shoulder. I'm not in a powerful position to lift. I'm not in a powerful position. You don't do kettlebell swings that way. You don't do clean and jerk that way. You don't even bench press that way. So what makes you think you can throw a powerful punch that way? What makes you think you can do a powerful armbar escape that way? And then there's structure, right? Efficient use of your limbs. And that's a little bit more waffly because, some people can make inefficient structures work, right? Some boxers can have their hands down by their waist and still do pretty good. I mean, look at what Anderson Silva managed to do by having amazing attributes. But generally, most people boxing should have their hands up, right? Like most people. There's some people who can break any rule, right? There's somebody who can break any rule, but let's just start at the basics. Have your hands up, chin down, not so much that your spine is curved, but chin down so your forehead's there. And so there are some commonalities, right? I mean, efficient structure. If I've got you in my closed guard, but my hands are out by my side, like I'm doing a break fall, that's not efficient structure. If I'm trying to pass your closed guard, but my hands are on the mat, that's not efficient structure. You're going to omoplata me, you're going to triangle me, you're going to reverse arm lock me, you're going to kimura me. I'm going to end up, unless I'm doing some kind of high level baiting, my hands on the ground and your closed guard is not good structure. There's some similarities. I mean, I really like working with people one-on-one, and what one person needs is not another. Like when I'm trying to learn a technique, I'll often, I'll watch, and that's useful, and I'll listen, and that's useful, but really, most often, I want to feel it. Can you do that to me? Oh, now I understand, right? That's what I need to learn. Now, how do you convey that over video? It's hard. This kind of feels like somebody's pushing your arm over your face, and like there's a bulldozer coming here, and you can't move back. Right? And sometimes you can convey it in words, but everybody learns a little bit differently. So trying to hit it from as many different angles as you can. Say it, show it, explain the larger context. Try and get people to feel it somehow.
Here's kind of an odd question. So just as much content as you put out across all of these disciplines and covered a wide variety of martial arts topics, and from videos to blogs to podcasts. Do you have any haters? I've never met anybody that didn't like you, but you know, but I mean,
Recently, I've been doing my best to change that. Right. I mean, I was one of the first people to come out and talk about COVID and say, no, it's probably legit, and we should probably not train. And jiu-jitsu is probably the best way to spread this, other than group sex. That certainly got some negative feedback, shall we say? And then it instantly got so politicized that if you share, like science and research on mask use or hydroxychloroquine or the fatality rates in Hong Kong, it's inevitably a political issue. So yeah, in the last 3 months, I've received more hate than I've received in the past 20 years of being online. In some sense, I'm okay with that. It's not something I enjoy at all. I don't actually, I'm not a troll. I don't enjoy going out looking for controversy. But I feel that with my background in biology, I've got a master's of biology, the fact that I'm a first responder and a hazmat specialist and a jiu-jitsu guy, I almost feel like I have a moral obligation to speak out. I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist, but I'm also not afraid to go and look at the actual science that's getting published in the preprints. So I feel like I have a bit of a moral obligation to speak out on this, and knowing full well that it's not, I mean, there's a lot of people I've really pissed off. I've received a couple of death threats. Apparently saying like that there's no good study showing the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. This was a couple of months ago. Like no randomized double-blind clinical trial is enough to get death threats. So,
oh my gosh, that's insane, man.
I think it's insane. I mean, I understand why people are getting so frustrated by the science, but man, we're 5 months into this. We're still learning new things about tuberculosis. That's been around for 2,500 years.
And it still kills a lot of people.
Still kills a lot of people, for sure. Yeah. We're 5 months into this. Of course, there's going to be messy data. There's going to be conflicting data. There's going to be people changing their tune and saying this, but so let's, before then, any haters? A couple minor incidents, but nothing too major. So I've made up for it in the last 3 months.
Man, I'll tell you where I can empathize with that in my vicinity, right? So we're here in the American South, and after Reconstruction ended, when in the South they started segregation, they started legislating what we call Jim Crow laws, basically creating a separate society for former slaves. Well, when they did that, they rewrote all the textbooks in these former Confederate states, these two particular groups, the United Daughters Confederacy. So I've been kind of providing some commentary, just historically speaking, like, hey, you guys ever heard of what they called in history the lost cause myth? Because I see people propagating it all the time, like they watched Gone with the Wind and accepted it as the truth. But this lost cause myth comes from this time that was propagated by these, like in Arkansas, we had 6 former Confederate officers who were governor from 1874 when Reconstruction ended, that next election cycle, moving forward. And then
I've never seen Civil War buffs as detailed as in Arkansas. Like it's astounding. You go to a barbecue joint and the guy's like, on April 17th, General this and that came down that trail over there, 40 feet that way. He got in an engagement, lost 2 of his men. Here are the names of those men. Then he went back up oh my God. Like
we had 750 engagements in Arkansas, actually.
So, yeah. I mean, it's, I can see why you'd get pushback on that, because that unfortunately is politicized. And history is more easily politicizable, I guess, than science. Not to say science is immune, but I was actually just reading some of the, there was a time in Louisiana and Alabama where to vote, you had to pass, you had to either produce a certificate to grade 5, or you had to pass like a 30 question questionnaire to master to demonstrate your mastery of English. And so I tried to take this test, and it's 30 questions. You had 10 minutes, and my God, I think that one person in 100 could pass it. Like, it's certain, you know, in the following sentence, what is, you know, circle the letter that is 3 places before the last letter in the alphabet in this sentence. I'm like, what does that even mean? But I can't stop to think about it, because now there's 29 questions more. And apparently, if you got one of those 30 questions wrong, you failed. So who had grade 5 education? Basically the whites. There weren't very many blacks who had grade 5 education, and they had to pass this written test. And honestly, it's more like a Mensa test or an SAT question. And I guarantee you SAT, like if you put that out there as an SAT thing, you get not very many people get 30 out of 30 at all.
Poll taxes were also common, right? To where you just, like, if you were, and two, the sad part is when this happened, this also disenfranchised poor whites as well, right? So, like, if you were a poor white that didn't have 5th grade education, you were, you know, you may also be a sharecropper and forced it. So that it really disenfranchised a lot of poor people, but primarily most blacks didn't even leave their their plantation after Civil War, because they were an agricultural worker. Where were they going to go? What were they going to do? So they stayed and negotiated sharecropping contracts and then get disenfranchised. But there was a period from 65 to 74. I just finished a book called The Strange Career of Jim Crow by C. Van Woodward. It's great. And he goes into this. It's short listen or read, but it outlines this whole history. It's like the definitive sort of book on it. It was a great.
I mean, as a Canadian, I didn't really know about, I'd heard the term Jim Crow, but I hadn't really looked into it for until about 5 years ago. I'm like, oh my God, a whole lot of people died in the Civil War for this. And it's almost like after the Civil War, just like before the Civil War, from the point of view of the average black slave. Or am I wrong about that?
No, yeah, that's yeah, and then too, you have a whole lot of people still that want to say, even though it's mentioned in all 11 secession letters, and even though the vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said our Confederacy is built on the cornerstone of slavery, it is our foundation, right? People still want to argue that slavery had nothing to do with it right here in the American South, and it being a historian here, it drives me crazy.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there was more to it than just slavery.
There was. The states' rights is always the one they like to bring up, and I'm like, yeah, states' rights to choose to be a slave state or to become a slave state. And it goes deeper than that, but it's like, you know, you don't want to oversimplify it or undersimplify it. There's a very long answer, but that's like, I do like to point out that it's mentioned in all the secession letters. You know, I mean, in some of them, it gets real righteous with their cause, with how much they go into it. You know, Arkansas, we sent more troops to fight in the Union than any other southern state aside from Tennessee.
Really? I would have thought Virginia would have had, wasn't Virginia the biggest state?
Yeah. So, like, I don't know. I would have to look up troop numbers on that. Yeah. But, Tennessee, I guess it makes sense because you had, that was vice president. That's his home state. So, but yeah. And, too, next to us, Missouri, only slave state that didn't secede from the Union. So Northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, where I was telling you they have to wear the mask, it's right up there on the border of Missouri. The war was crazy in that part of the state.
Yeah. I don't know. I know, it's sad to say, I know much more about wars 500 years ago in Europe than I do about the Civil War. I mean, I've listened to a couple of in-depth lecture series about it, and that's it.
Yeah, I've recently been, speaking of Canada, which primarily takes place more around like New York, but we're 1812. That's something that I've gone down the rabbit hole on recently.
Is it true? Is it true that when the Brits and the Canadians marched down to the White House to burn it down, that they gave the Americans notice saying, "Hey, we're going to burn this down. You might want to remove like your important documents from here"? I've heard that that's That would be so Canadian. Like, look, we have to do this. I want that to be true. I don't know if that is true.
I'm going to look into that. I knew that they knew because they knew the whole day. Like, president was out in the field. His wife was able to get like a picture of Washington and some curtains and some silver. But they didn't know. They'd evacuate everything. And I know that I just read this recently. Her like attaché that was supposed to be watching her and everything abandoned her. Right, first lady. But yeah, I mean, they knew they were coming and evacuated the whole city. I mean, I felt like in an orderly fashion, like had several hours to do it. So they either had notice from spies or they sent them, you know, hey, because man, DC, another thing people don't realize, DC was actually still pretty small at that time. Still a lot of underdeveloped and under construction buildings.
Yeah, one of my maxims is beware of what you want to be true, right? I mean, it's just so easy to fool yourself. There's no shortage of cognitive biases. There's so many ways that you can, you know, fool yourself. So when I heard that story from somebody who prides himself as a historian but isn't actually a historian, it's like, that would be fantastic. It was like, excuse me,
I'm going to look into that.
We need to burn your Capitol building now, but why don't you take 3 hours to get the most valuable stuff out first? But
yeah. You know, too, what's funny is at that time it was the White House is actually a yellow color.
Oh,
it wasn't called the White House until 45 while FDR was in office. That's when it was called the Presidential Mansion.
Oh,
back
I had
then.
No idea.
I
written
learned
into the Constitution that it's the White House and that there are 2 parties in the States.
I remember when in college when I learned this, I was like, what else have I been lied to about? It's called the White House. Yeah. Well, hey, so I got one more thing to talk to you about. Sure. Jiu-Jitsu related as well. Maybe you have an opinion on this. Like I was listening briefly. I haven't finished it, to Jocko Willink on Joe Rogan. I've listened to his book, Extreme Ownership. It's pretty good. But he was saying that he feels like that law enforcement should spend 1/5 of the time working on maybe the type of stuff that we work on, right? Jiu-jitsu, some sort of defensive tactic, martial arts training, because we're seeing that a lot of departments, maybe not even mandatory requirement for the department. Some departments mandate 40 hours per year, and it kind of varies by department. Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been trying to talk with people about it. Anybody I know that trains jiu-jitsu, I know there's movements around getting jiu-jitsu in Georgia, one of our southern states. Jiu-jitsu is going to become mandatory for that state for law enforcement. So do you have any thoughts on all that?
I want to be careful going outside what I know. Right? I mean, I COVID and stuff, there's certain aspects of that I've actually done a lot of the research. I mean, as soon as we start talking about this, we're really brushing up against Black Lives Matters. I mean, that whole, the massive, anti-police brutality protests that are going on right now. So, this is something I don't feel really, I'm going to have an opinion. I just want to preface it by saying I have not really taken a look at the data. There's just not time in the day for me to be an expert on very many things at all. So that being said, based off of working with some cops, as training partners, working a little bit on some police tactics training, I'm not. Jiu-jitsu training would keep cops safer. This is true, and it can be a dangerous job. So I think there's definitely 100% validity to teaching jiu-jitsu to cops. And most police departments do a pretty piss-poor job of defensive tactics. They really do. Usually what happens is somebody comes in there and goes, well, last year you had defensive tactics training and 4 cops got injured and this many hours of overtime. In my amazing new system of, remote nerve manipulation or defensive tactics with some long acronym, DQTSB XYZ STARS training. It's so effective that we can train that with almost no contact and nobody's going to get injured and your officers are going to be 10 times more effective. And the chief goes, well, I don't know, that sounds good to me. There's a whole lot of bullshit that's being peddled there to cops. Now, does it make them less likely to end up in a situation where, I mean, functionally, this is about protecting cops, but then it's also about protecting civilians, right? Whether it's an arrest gone bad, whether they're arresting the wrong person, whether they're arresting the right person, whether the person fights back. Jiu-jitsu in the wrong hands could certainly make the person more of a, if you put jiu-jitsu into the hands of a sadist, it can make them more of a sadist. Oh, great. I know exactly how to put knee on the face now. This might look like an innocent knee on the belly, but I know
That's
exactly.
a great point, man. I hadn't really thought about that. That is a great point.
I would like to think that most people wouldn't be like that, but we got to acknowledge that that could be a possibility. There was an amazing, I mean, I have not looked into this, but I've kind of tangentially read about it. Somebody was posting the difference in hours and requirements that cops need in like Finland, Norway, Germany, and the United States. Right? And like Germany, you need a 2-year degree. Finland, you need a 3-year degree. You know, United States, you need like, I don't know, almost nothing. It's a 2 years training in Germany. It's 3 years training in Iceland. In the United States, it's like, I don't know, 24 weeks or whatever the number is. And then of course it was like, as a kicker, it was like number of people killed in the last 10 years, number of people killed in the last 10 years, number of people killed in the last 10 years. And it was like 4, 8, 7. And in the United States, it's about 1,000 people a year get shot by the cops. So now I recognize, of course, the United States is different because it's such a heavily armed society. You guys have got a shit ton of guns. I've been in Arkansas. It's pretty unusual.
We love guns down here.
Yeah. So that would, of course, change the whole policing dynamic. If you gave me a choice of being a cop in, I don't know, Finland versus the United States, all things being, I'd take Finland, right? Like, let's just deal with, you know, people who are like throwing gefilte fish or, you know, like pickled herring at each other when they get too drunk, as opposed to, you know, like, well, I've only got four guns in this car, but in that other car, I've got 3 more. And if I go into that house, I got a whole arsenal, right? So I think it's a little bit simplistic to talk about the amount of training versus the amount of people get killed each year during the arrest process.
And that's an understand. Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's that undersimplifies the issue. It's because it's super complex. Biggest thing I've advocated for is the consistency. Like you hit it on the head when you're talking about, well, we sent Dave back to get the Gracie certification this year. We paid several $1,000s for it, and he's here to teach us because he's an instructor now.
Yep.
You know,
I've seen that exact thing. Fortunately, in the case that I can think of, the guy who went and got the Gracie certification by the department was already a very, very highly skilled Carlson Gracie black belt. So he was just going to get like the, I don't know, the stamp of approval. The department could say, no, he was not only a black belt, he's a defensive tactics trained guy. Okay, so it made sense in that one case. But if Dave is just, I mean, what percentage of people fail the Gracie defensive tactics course? I mean, if it's less than 50%, it's pretty much everyone's passing, and it should be a really hard course to pass. I don't know what those passing stats are.
well,
but there's a whole lot of Daves out there who are fat and out of shape, and maybe you know, just are the senior guy who's going to take this course.
Yeah, and I mean those people, I think they could obviously benefit from lifestyle and wellness aspects of training.
Mm-hmm.
I broke it down to, I was talking with a guy at the gym who competes, and I broke it to him this way. I was like, hey, so these guys train 40 hours 1 week a year in their defensive tactics, like this one particular group. I was like, so imagine that you did seminars for 5 days, you know, and you did MMA seminars, and then you're going to fight for the rest of the year. And you're going to get that experience like a cop gets on the job experience arresting people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and that's your training. That's your camps. That's everything. You get these 5 days of seminars for 8 hours, and then you go fight.
Yeah.
And I was like,
wouldn't be the most efficient way to do it, would it? But
Yeah, but that's like, but like the analogy I was like, or you could train 2 days a week or more, because you want to, you want to do well, you want to feel comfortable, you want to feel confident. It's just like the older I've gotten, like I ride my bike and I exercise, and I do all these things for my wellness, and so I can keep training. And I think that's a lot of, we need to maybe afford these time to them on the job. Like Jocko was saying, like 1/5 of your time while you're working. Like Google gets to take a nap at work. Like the cop can't go do an hour of a martial art on the clock and it be kind of an encouraged thing
no.
or something.
You know
like
what? I For sure it would make the cops safer, and that's a good thing. Would it make the public safer? I'd like to think so, but I would want to see data. Like maybe there's data. Like if maybe it'd be a pretty easy graph. Like take the entire nation, take the number of hours of defensive tactics training. There's got to be some that do 10 hours a year. There's got to be some that do 40 hours a year. There's got to be some that do 100 hours a year, and plot that against the likelihood of shooting somebody per 1,000 policing hours or whatever. You do an interesting statistical analysis to see. I would love to see that data. I would like to think that it would help, because it would make people less. Here's an example. I once went to an Eric Paulson seminar down in Seattle, and there were a whole bunch of martial artists, but there was also a group of 10 recruits from the police academy who were there. I don't know how they ended up there, but they all came. And so over the course of the 2 days, I got to basically lay hands on each of them, right? We're doing standing clinching drills, not full force, but just push, pull. And honestly, 8 out of the 10 of them were like they had never, forget martial arts. It felt like they'd never lifted a weight or played ultimate frisbee or done Tai Chi. Just no sense of base posture and structure, essentially, right? Like no athleticism. There were 2 guys, one guy and one girl. The guy had done some weight training, so obviously he had like some basic balance, and the girl was just super feisty. But 8 out of 10 felt like they had never, like they were computer programmers who'd been, I don't know, locked behind a desk for 10 years, and now they're like, oh, like I need to fight, and just no physical confidence and no reason for physical confidence. So that's my little snapshot, random sample, semi-random sample of that. And I know that if I had that little confidence in my body and what I could do, or even just like staying upright if somebody pushes me, I would, come out with my taser and my gun in both hands, and I'd just be far more likely to escalate that really quickly, because I know I have no fallback plan at all if they come within a certain distance. And they'd be right. They did have no fallback plan at all. I've also have seen some and trained with some Arkansas police recruits when I was going to the Arkansas Fire Academy. And like generally the level of conditioning, so I was a firefighter going through the firefighting program. There are a bunch of cops going through the cop program. They heard that I did UFC, right?
Oh, we get that. Oh, yeah.
So
you train UFC?
I train UFC. So they wanted to take a run at me. So I was a purple belt at the time, I think. Oh, okay, cool. Like we'll train. Like I'm not going to be a dick about it. I'll just roll them, tap them out. And I think there were 10 guys on the first go through. 1, 2, tap 1, tap 2, tap 3, tap 4, tap. Everyone else is standing around chirping, but there's like 8 to 10 guys who are brave enough to actually put their money where their mouth is. Go through all of them. Second time through, there's only 4. Like 4 of them have already dropped out. Third time through, there's like 2. And just the level of conditioning, like just you better not ever get in a fist fight, because you're going to be gassed in about 15 seconds. Like, so maybe it's not even martial arts training. Maybe it's like basic physical conditioning standards as a start. And I've just lost my entire Arkansas law enforcement officer population, but man, it was just a real illustration of how piss poor. There was one guy who was a kickboxer who had great endurance, so we ended up sparring. But out of a semi-random sample of 8 or 10 guys who were brave enough to actually get on the mat with somebody they didn't know. Like one guy had what I would call decent endurance. That's just a recipe for disaster, really, because they've got to shoot people. There's nothing else they can do.
Your body will fail you in those times. I mean, even we were at morning class the other day, and someone was squeezing too hard. They were new, and they held their breath, and they were tired, and they overexerted after that. And then after the round, I could tell they were panicked, like they had panic going on. They walked over, and they were kind of, and then they plugged one of the fans in, and I was like, "Oh, okay, how you doing there, guy?" And then I walked over the door. They stick their head out the door, just gasping
Looking for air.
Yeah, but I mean, that was across a 3-minute round, and that guy trains, and he's there every morning, and he's retired military.
Claustrophobia issues, maybe.
This guy, I think he just partially that because he got toppled over, and then he spent some time on bottom. But man, he'll just get onto something, and he's smaller, you know, and he's like close to 50, but he'll squeeze, you know, and it just gas him out, holding his breath, I think is probably what happened. But you know, those are things that are common.
We can kind of laugh at that, and then I think back to my first couple competitions when I was already spent hundreds of hours on the mat, and think of how quickly I got tired, like exhausted, barely able to function, tired. And I must have either holding my breath or just shallow breathing, like at a time when you really should be getting using every orifice on your head to get air into your lungs. You know, breathe in through your ears.
Yeah, that's exactly. And I experienced the same thing many times. I tell people all the time, I was to brown belt before I was like walking off of a match being like, hey, I still got my forearms. This is great. Because I just had to learn how to grip.
Oh,
yeah.
Keep grip.
Yeah, but that's the sort of stuff. And, you know, that is an X factor too on law enforcement that, you know, like somebody's brought this as like the uncertainty of, does this person have a weapon? And
for sure,
the fighting, like, you know, a jiu-jitsu competition. Yeah, we get that way in the competition, but quote unquote aren't technically fighting for our life.
Yes.
You know, so that's another layer of it that I can't really speak to because everything I've done's been a sport. MMA, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, all those competitions where there's a ref.
Yeah, the fact that there's a gun, and if you lose the engagement, the guy could get your gun and kill you, changes everything. Like it really does, and it gives me some compassion for what. I mean, there's tons and tons of footage online of cops doing terrible, shitty things during these protests. I get and some of it's inexcusable. On the other hand, like the consequences of being a cop and getting cut off from all your buddies are different than being a protester and getting cut off from all your buddies. If you're a protester, you get cut off by all your buddies, by the cops, you might get knocked up a bit, but you're probably going in a paddy wagon. Probably. Let's hope, unless it's one of these super extreme cases of actual brutality. But if you're a cop and you get cut off from your buddies, I mean, you've got a gun, right? Like if I didn't come to the protest with a gun, I can take yours. And so it's not a symmetrical situation. And in a recent podcast, Sam Harris on the Making Sense podcast went into depth about this and probably came up with a position that pissed off everybody, right? Like probably pissed off the Blue Lives Matters, the White Lives Matters, and the Black Lives Matters people, you know, Green Lives Matter, but it's not a symmetrical situation. And but really, just because something like grappling with weapons, which I've done, is terrifying enough, right? When you start thinking this through. But is your solution to that not doing any grappling with or without weapons at all? I think that would be even dumber. Like the scarier the thing is, almost the more you should train for it. And we do this in jiu-jitsu all the time. Hey, let's start with me on an armbar with my hands closed. That's pretty scary. Like one step away from tapping, but let's drill this. And maybe you're not going full force on me. Maybe you're not actually going to crank my arm. Or let's start with, you with me in a digging for the heel hook. Or you got the leg entanglement. You're digging for the heel hook. If that's in a match, I'm at DEFCON 5. Does DEFCON go up to 5? I'm at I
think it does in 10th Planet.
Okay.
I think that's like or maybe that's DEFCON 4, but when they like rear naked choke on the twister in 10th Planet, I think they call that like DEFCON level 4.
I can't keep track of the DEFCON, either the 10th Planet alternate jiu-jitsu technology or alternate jiu-jitsu terminology, or their alternate universe cosmology. Both are very confusing to me.
Yeah, I was telling Cora because I shared a video today in Jiu-Jitsu, this group online, and there was a white belt that commented on it. It was like, well, Master Sauer, his black belt that I train with does it this way. And I was like, cool, dude, But she's like, how do you deal with that? I was like, hey, imagine Eddie Bravo. He believes the earth's flat. Like, imagine the shit that he gets. You know what I'm saying? Like, you think it bothers him? Like, he's not. That's why I asked you, because, man, I had the guy, Ari from Submissions 101 on a while back, and, like, he's got a lot of hate online. And I think that anybody that puts himself out there like you're doing, or like anybody that I've come into contact with, or like I'm doing with these videos, you're going to get off-color comments. You're gonna have expertise to comment on a subject, and you're gonna be doing a social good by doing that. And people are gonna send you death threats and stuff. Like, but I think that it's interesting how much hate there is in the online space, and it's
what
almost
was
like
it
a byproduct.
Churchill said about if you have enemies, that's good. It means you've stood up. It means you've stood for something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've heard that quote. I'm not sure if it's Churchill. I think it is, though.
Well, then it must be Mark Twain. The universal rule of ascribing any quote that you can't give you don't know the source of, ascribing it to Mark Twain. Isn't there one other person that you're supposed to give it to? You're supposed to give it to Mark Twain?
Kevin Bacon, perhaps. I've said that 7 degrees, everything's connected to Kevin Bacon and 7 people or less, or something like that.
I want to say it's Churchill.
Yeah. Well, man, I really let's go ahead and wrap it up. I really appreciate you working with me on I felt like we pulled this together. You're willing to work out a time this week, and I followed you for years, and it's been an honor and a privilege.
It's very nice to meet you virtually.
Yes.
And it's too bad that we missed each other physically all those years ago.
Yeah. Well, hey, I want to say, what year was that when you came through?
99.
I wasn't even training jiu-jitsu till 06. So, yeah. I think the year you got your black belt, right?
Back in the spring of 99. Yeah, I got my black belt in 06.
Yeah, back in
I got my black belt New Year's Eve day of 2006. I was very, very glad that I did, because one of my best friends and training partners had got his black belt like 2 days before when he came to class. And if I had gotten it the next day, it would have been 2007. He would have never let me hear the end of it, of how he got his black belt a year before I did. So I was very highly relieved to receive it New Year's Day, 2006.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, man, jiu-jitsu, it's been great for me all these years. And like when I was coming up, man, I was definitely following you, and I really appreciate all the content you put out. So
I'm so glad you found it useful.
Yeah. Well, have a great day, man. Appreciate you.
Take care and good luck.
Thank you.